through this.
Everybody loves to say they've got redundancy, right up until one backhoe, one bad switch, or one shared dependency turns that backup plan into a synchronized collapse. Today we're talking about the uncomfortable truth that a lot of so-called resilience in public safety is really just the same failure wearing a second name tag. And that's coming up next on TiPS, Today in Public Safety.
Welcome to TiPS, Today in Public Safety, your go-to podcast for today's breaking stories and public safety news. Here's your host, Fletch, with today's tips.
Welcome to TiPS, Today in Public Safety. I'm a NENA certified ENP, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I bring you the latest and sometimes controversial takes on emergency communications. Today we're taking a deep dive into 2 circuits, 1 backhoe, the illusion of redundancy in public safety. Now let me say this right up front. Redundancy is a beautiful thing. Redundancy saves systems. It saves operations. In some cases, it saves lives. But fake redundancy, the kind that looks really good in a PowerPoint deck but folds like a cheap lawn chair in real life, is worse than having no redundancy at all. Because it gives people the confidence that they never earned. And that's the dangerous part. A lot of agencies, enterprises, and even vendors love to say, we have backup systems. Great, fantastic, wonderful, gold star. But the next question should always be, backup from what? And then right behind that comes the real question. Does your backup fail for the same reason as your primary? Because if that answer is yes, congratulations. You don't have resilience. You've got duplicate disappointment. Let's start with the classic environment, 2 circuits. Now this is one of my favorites because it sounds so strong in meetings. We've got primary connectivity and secondary connectivity. We've got diverse routing. We've got multiple paths. And then everybody nods and everybody feels better. Somebody updates a spreadsheet and somebody else puts high availability in big bold letters on a slide deck and calls it a day. Then, somewhere in the future, a contractor with a backhoe in some obscure parking lot in, Kansas, slices open one conduit and suddenly both circuits vanish at exactly the same time, like they were soulmates. Why? Because these 2 independent paths were not really independent. They may have been billed separately. They may have even shown up as different services on paper. But somewhere out in the real world, they were sharing the same trench, the same pole line, the same manhole, or the same entrance facility. And that's not diversity. That's just twins wearing different hats. Now trust me, this is not just a telecom issue. A lot of industries, public safety included, have a bad habit of mistaking duplication for separation. They buy 2 of something and assume they've solved the problem. 2 routers, 2 carriers, 2 servers, 2 power feeds, 2 people on a team. But if those 2 things still depend on one single choke point, you haven't reduced risk. You simply made the failure harder to spot. Now let's move up to the cloud because it gets even more fun there. Now I know, the cloud's magical. It floats above us all untouched by earthly concerns. It's protected by buzzwords and quarterly earnings calls. Except it's not. Sure, cloud architecture can absolutely improve resilience, but only if people design it correctly. If your failover environment depends on the same identity provider, the same DNS service, the same management console, the same configuration template, or the same human team making the same mistake in both places, guess what? Your cloud backup may be every bit as fragile as the thing that it's backing up. You really didn't eliminate the single point of failure. You just gave it a passport and a more expensive invoice. And then there's backup power. Oh yeah, backup power is where a lot of people get spiritually attached to resilience theater. They'll say, We've got generator backup. Great! Does it start? How about testing? Under load. And what about that transfer switch? Is it reliable? And don't forget your fuel contract. Does it ensure your priority when everyone else needs fuel in the same emergency? And is somebody checking the batteries? And let's not forget that maintenance schedule. Is it based on engineering or just on the phrase, I think somebody looked at it last year? Because owning a generator isn't the same thing as surviving on generator power. Trust me, I've got one. And on one test, it didn't start. Apparently, the battery charger circuit tripped, and the batteries to start it died. I've seen organizations talk about resilience like it's a decorative feature, like it's crown molding. No, resilience is a discipline. It's got to be challenged. It has to be tested. In fact, it's got to be attacked by scenario planning, by failure drills, by ugly questions nobody wants to hear in the budget meeting. But this is where the truth comes out. Now here's where public safety gets hit especially hard, because a lot of their systems are deeply interconnected. Calls, location, mapping, CAD, logging, text, analytics, cloud services, identity, remote administration, cybersecurity tools, carrier networks, PSAP interconnects. It's a giant web of interdependencies, which really comes down to meaning a failure in one place may not look dramatic at first. It may not even look like an outage. It might just look like a delay. It might look like missing data. It might look like a transfer that technically completed but arrived with none of the context. It might look like a map that loads but with stale or broken layers. And it might look like a backup answering point that receives the call but can't do anything useful with it. You see, that's the sneaky part. The system has not fully died, so everybody assumes it's fine. But operationally, it's bleeding out on the floor. Let me put it another way. If your primary and backup both rely on the same GIS data, then your failover plan is basically, well, when this breaks, we'll continue breaking at a secondary location. That's not continuity. That's synchronized failure. And let's not forget the human side, because that is where the most creative self-deception happens. Some agencies think they've got staffing redundancy because more than one person knows how to do the thing. But in reality, only one person really understands important things like the routing logic, the carrier escalation, the firewall quirks, the vendor contacts, that weird patching sequence, and that one mystery process everybody's afraid to touch because Steve used to handle that. And that's not institutional resilience. That's a hostage situation with documentation problems. If your resilience plan depends on one person answering their phone while on vacation or at dinner or halfway through a doctor's appointment, your system is not redundant. It's just emotionally supported by Greg. And Greg deserves better. Real resilience means diversity of path, diversity of provider whenever possible, diversity of design, diversity of power, diversity of knowledge, and maybe most importantly, diversity of failure modes. What the hell does that mean? It means the backup shouldn't break for the same exact reason that the primary did. That's the whole game. Because when the bad day comes, and trust me, it always does, nobody cares about how pretty your architecture diagram looked at the meeting. Nobody cares that the procurement sheet had green checkboxes all over it. Nobody cares the vendor said the word resilient 17 times in just one meeting. What matters is whether the service kept working when something really went wrong. Reality check. Here's your reality check. Public safety doesn't get to measure uptime by optimism. You can't dispatch confidence. You can't transfer a slide deck. You can't tell a caller, well, redundancy looks really solid in the grant application. A resilient system is not just the one that has extra parts. It's one that keeps delivering the mission when one of those parts gets punched in the face. So if your agency, your vendor, or your enterprise customer is proudly talking about backup this and backup that, ask the next question. What exactly is shared? Shared carrier, shared conduit, shared building entrance, shared DNS, shared policy engine, shared authentication, shared map data, shared human expertise, shared assumptions. Because that laundry list is where the next real failure lives. Not in the glossy sales pitch, not in the word redundant. It's in the shared dependency that nobody bothered to chase all the way down. The bottom line. Look, the bottom line's this. Redundancy isn't about having two of something. It's about making sure the second thing doesn't fail for the same reason as the first. That's it. That's the lesson. If both of your circuits can be killed by one backhoe, you don't have two paths. If your systems rely on the same bad data, you don't have continuity. If both of your plans depend on the same overworked human hero, you don't have resilience. All you have is simply a comforting story. And stories don't route 911 calls. So the next time somebody says, "Don't worry, we've got redundancy," just smile politely and ask the question that ruins everybody's afternoon. Okay, show me what happens when the thing both sides secretly depend on goes away. And that's where the grown-up conversation begins. That wraps up today's episode of TiPS, Today in Public Safety. Thanks so much for listening. For more updates and insights, remember to follow me on social media at Fletch911. And you can visit 911tips.com for a complete archive of all of my previous episodes. My blogs are available at Fletch.tv, and my professional website is at Fletch911.com. Stay safe. Thanks so much for listening. And if you're in public safety, thanks for what you do every single day. We'll catch you next time.
You've been listening to TiPS, Today in Public Safety, your go-to podcast for today's breaking stories and public safety news. Hosted by Fletch and available every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Catch past episodes on 911tips.com. Be sure to like and subscribe, and remember to join us each week for the latest on NG911. I am Spider Harrison, the official 911 voiceover dude. Catch me on Sirius XM on various channels, including 90s on 9, the 10 spot, and on the weekend countdown on Hits 1. Or don't regret it for the rest of your life. Either way, I'm good.